Evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Smita Nath, Assistant Professor with the Department of Medicine. I would like to start this session by offering my sincere apologies for the interruption of our last session. I am here to discuss about the overall approach to a patient of COVID-19. And remember, this approach will need 3 steps. The first is the etiquette towards a patient of COVID-19. Then we have to follow strict infection prevention and control measures. And finally, we go on to classify the disease and plan our investigation and management accordingly. And therefore, I decided to start my session with emphasizing on the take-home message that I would like you to carry forward. The take-home message for today's session is empathy for patients and healthcare workers. We have to adhere to the IPC protocol. Knowledge, attitude, and practice of COVID guidelines is mandatory, and success will depend upon the amalgamation of clinical skills and inculcation of medical ethics. Why? Because the last 1.5 years has been a test of healthcare workers' forbearance and professional integrity. So, a patient of COVID-19 has to be approached in a holistic manner. The patient is very vulnerable, and you have to take care not just of their clinical needs, but also their mental and emotional needs. How do we do that? There are 2 protocols meant to soothe the patient, to inculcate confidence in any patient, and these come in very handy in patients of COVID-19. The first protocol that we follow is the universally upset patient protocol. In this protocol, when if you are imparting the diagnosis or the news about the diagnosis of COVID-19 to a disease, you have to get into their shoes and walk around in them. You have to approach the patient with sentences like, "You look really upset. Do you want to talk about it? And I'm sorry that this is happening to you. What would you like me to do to help you out?" And most of these patients are away from their family members, isolated in a clinical ward. So this goes a long way in inculcating or in gaining their confidence. Okay, and you should always thank them for sharing their feelings. And the feeling that they are going to share is that they would like their family members to be a part of the treatment process as well. They would want us to relay the information to the family members, and you should be doing that. No matter how busy we are with the work, we have to assure the patient that every step of the way information will be shared with them as well as with their family members. The second approach to breaking bad news in any case is the spikes protocol. This comes in handy in an OPD where we have an interview already set up. We can assess the patient's perception of COVID-19, and remember, in most cases there are dogmas associated with the disease. They think that they are going to be discriminated against. You have to tell them that that a healthcare worker especially never discriminates against a patient on basis of their disease process. You have to obtain their invitation before carrying out any investigation or any measures for management of the disease process. Always give knowledge and information to the patient. Again, since these patients are isolated from their family members, you have to keep the family members abreast of the situation also. You have to address patient's response with emotion and empathy, and strategize and then summarize everything to the patient himself. And that is why the strategy that we came up with was something which is called situation monitoring, where every day at the start of our rounds, we will assess our team in terms of the workload, stress, fatigue, skill, and then we will set a triage. We will divide the patient on basis of their needs, on basis of their clinical severity, and we will then establish goal for the team for each and every patient. What investigation has to be done, what changes in management have to be made, whether this patient will need ICU intervention in the near future or not. And we always keep abreast of our resources that are available to us. You should have knowledge about all the facilities that is available in the ward. आपको पता होना चाहिए कि आपके पास कितने ऑक्सीजन सिलेंडर्स हैं, आपको पता होना चाहिए कि आपके पास कितनी बाईपैप मशीन्स हैं, क्या मेडिसिन आ रही है, कौन absent hai, patient details you should try and remember. So you have to stay one step ahead of this, not only this disease process, but every information, technical information, administrative information related to this disease. And then we come to the actual part of recording, not just seeing the patient, not just monitoring the patient, not just treating the patient, but also recording history, vitals, and examination of the patient. Documentation is very important for patient follow-up. So how do now we come to the third part about the COVID disease per se. The above steps are general steps. We do them for every disease. We have to be doing them all our professional lives, but it's always good to make it a part of your habit. All these steps have to be a part of your day-to-day activities. So coming to COVID per se, how do we define a case of COVID? A case of COVID is divided into two parts. A patient is either a suspect or a confirmed case of COVID. A suspect is a patient who meets the clinical and epidemiological criteria of COVID-19. The clinical criteria of COVID-19 is any patient who presents to us with fever and signs of upper respiratory tract infection like running nose, headache, coryza, cough, expectoration, chest pain, and the epidemiological criteria involves either residence in an area of transmission or a healthcare worker who has been in contact with a COVID-19 patient, confirmed or suspect, in the last 14 days. The B part of the suspect is a patient of SARI. SARI means a respiratory tract infection with or without documented fever. If this patient has fever, then the fever has to be above 100.4 degrees centigrade. So a suspect will be a patient who meets the clinical and epidemiological criteria of COVID-19 or a patient with SARI. The most important part is these are patients who have yet not been tested for COVID-19. So they show symptoms suggestive of COVID-19, but we don't have a test yet to confirm the diagnosis of COVID-19. Then comes the confirmed case of COVID-19. A confirmed case of COVID-19 is a patient in whom the RT-PCR is positive, as was discussed in the previous sessions, or a patient with positive antigen test, or even an asymptomatic patient who has a positive test. So a patient, whether symptomatic or asymptomatic, has a positive test of COVID-19 either by RT-PCR or by antigen rapid detection kit is a confirmed case of COVID-19. So we have to categorize the patients into two parts, either as a suspect or a confirmed case. Now, what do? You have seen the patient, you have assessed the patient, and you have divided them into a suspect or a confirmed case. What is the next step that you have to follow? Here, the following of infection prevention control measures come into effect. As soon as you have come in contact with either a suspect or a confirmed patient, you give the patient a triple layer surgical mask. You direct the patient to an earmarked area. For suspects or confirmed cases, always maintain a distance of 6 feet if possible. Follow the cough etiquettes and hand hygiene as discussed. So, what are the standard infection prevention and control measures that you have to follow at the triage when you have given the patient a triple layered mask? You should practice hand and respiratory hygiene. You should wear appropriate PPE. You should always practice safe waste management, environmental cleaning, sterilization, use single-use disposable instrument, and implement contact, droplet, and airborne precautions. Now, what are the airborne precautions and the contact precautions that we have to keep in mind? Remember, airborne precautions have to be implemented in cases where the size of particles is less, airborne particles is less than 5 microns. And here we have to wear appropriate PPE in form of gloves, long sleeved gowns, the eye protection, and N95 respirator. And this is where airborne precaution differs from contact precaution. Contact precaution is done to protect the patient from getting infected by the healthcare worker. We do it normally in case in immunocompromised hosts like patients of malignancy or patients of immunocompromised states like HIV, patients of tuberculosis where they are immunocompromised and we don't wish to transmit infection to them because they are very vulnerable to opportunistic infection. These contact precautions are also being followed now in case of COVID-19. The contact precaution that you have to follow is use of a triple-layered surgical mask. We wear gloves and gown. There should be disinfection of shared instruments. We should avoid patient movement as much as possible. So do not send patients unnecessarily for any investigation. The patient as well as the healthcare worker has to avoid touching eyes, faces, and nose, and also avoid touching environmental surfaces. It is always advisable, for example, to stand away from the walls, not to lean on the walls or not to lean on the chair while talking or doing any work. And the hand hygiene. We have already discussed these steps of hand hygiene. Here, I will just show you a pictorial representation of the 7 steps that have to be followed while following hand hygiene. Similarly, you should always wear an N95 respirators because mostly transmission of COVID-19 is through airborne particles, and this is prevented by wearing an N95 respirator. The N in N95 stands for non-oil-based respirators. The donning and doffing of the PPE has already been discussed. What I would like to stress as a clinician is that we know the steps of donning and doffing, but more often than not, we are hard pressed for time. There is an emergency occurring every 10 minutes. And sometimes we just lose focus of ourselves because we are focusing on the patients. But we have to develop this habit. There is no way out of it. So please don and doff PPE carefully. Always take meals before donning PPE, drink water, use washroom, remove all the jewelry, start with performing hand hygiene. Then we go on to wear our gloves, followed by wearing our first set of gloves, followed by wearing of the surgical cap. Then we examine, after wearing mask and surgical cap, we examine the PPE kit for any damage. The coverall that we wear has to be examined for any damages, and then we go on to wear the proper coverall by wearing the leg sleeves first. Then we will sit on the clean chair and wear rest of the PPE, followed by wearing the N95 mask, shields, and goggles. Before leaving the donning area, we will perform hand hygiene again on our gloved hands with 20% alcohol rub. Similarly, while doffing, do not be in haste. I have included doffing and donning in this session also because there are certain aspects. We have been wearing PPE for hours at a stretch. So when the time comes for doffing, we are already dehydrated. We are already feeling very hot inside the PPE kit, and we want to get out of it as soon as possible. But remember that you have been patient for last 6 or 8 hours. So patience for another 10 or 15 minutes is not going to make much of a difference. Just calm down. Take a breath, stand in the doffing area for 2 minutes and remind yourself that this is a step which has to be carried out carefully. Okay, so go to the designated area, check the PPE for any soiling or leak. And that is why doffing should be done in presence of an observer. So your colleague or anyone from your team can look at the PPE kit for presence of any soiling. If there is any soiling, you can use alcohol swabs on that part of your PPE kit to remove the soiling. And this area already has a clean and dirty chair. So while you are wearing the PPE kit, you can sit on the dirty chair, discard the PPE kit. After you take out a single item, please perform hand hygiene. So if we have to remove our the outer pair of gloves first, we will perform hand hygiene. Similarly, after removing our shoe cover, we will perform hand hygiene. Then we go on to remove our coverall, we perform hand hygiene. Okay, so every step has to be followed by performance of hand hygiene, and do not be in waste. Another 5 or 10 minutes are not going to make any difference. After discarding the PPE kit, you wash your hands with soap and water for 20 seconds at least, and then move out of the COVID area. So after discussing this, we come to now, what have we done? We came in contact with a patient, either a suspect or a confirmed case of COVID-19. We talked to the patient, we have already admitted the patient or have planned further management of the patient. We have donned the PPE kit. Now we have entered the ward. What do we do now? The first thing that you have to do is, after confirmation of the disease, you have to classify the disease as mild, moderate, or severe. These are the 3 categories of COVID-19 as described by Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. So what constitutes a mild disease? A mild disease is an uncomplicated URI with normal saturation. The saturation of the patient is always going to be more than 95%. The next categorization is moderate disease. In moderate disease, the patient has pneumonia, sans any sign of severe disease. So what are these signs of pneumonia? The patient will have fever, cough, dyspnea, hypoxia. The saturation will be between 90 and 93%, and the respiratory rate will be more than 25 in these patients. The severe disease has been classified into 4 parts as sepsis, septic shock, and ARDS. So what constitutes severe pneumonia in patients of COVID-19? Severe pneumonia in adults is presence of clinical features of dyspnea, hypoxia, fever, SpO2 of less than 90, and respiratory rate of more than 30. Similarly, ARDS, a person can move from a mild disease. Same person who today has mild disease will have moderate disease 2 days after that, or severe disease 3 or 4 days after that. So the disease, there is a definite progression of disease in certain subset of individuals. So knowing the difference between mild, moderate, severe disease is very important. Another part of severe disease, apart from severe pneumonia, is presence of ARDS. For diagnosing ARDS, we use radiological criteria, as well as we make use of arterial blood gas. So a patient of COVID-19 who suddenly worsens, develops new respiratory symptoms, for example, an increase in respiratory rate or an increase in subjective feeling of breathlessness. And when we do a chest X-ray for these patients for evaluation, we find that there are bilateral unexplained lung opacities, which cannot be explained by presence of a cardiac disease or any other respiratory illness or fluid overload. Then we can suspect that this patient is suffering from ARDS. So ARDS is presence of severe or worsening respiratory symptoms in absence of a cardiac or different respiratory disease. Then we go on to do a ABG for these patients, which provides PaO2 by FiO2 ratio. Based on PaO2 and FiO2 ratio, the COVID-19 ARDS has been divided into 3 parts: mild, moderate, and severe ARDS. So if you see on your ABG that PaO2 and FiO2 ratio is somewhere between 200 and 300, then this falls in the category of mild disease. Similarly, if the PaO2 and FiO2 ratio is between 200 and 100, it falls in the category of moderate disease. And a PaO2 and FiO2 ratio of less than 100 falls in the category of severe disease. The other aspect of severe disease is presence of sepsis, and this sepsis can sometimes present itself even in absence of respiratory distress. So a patient of COVID-19 may come to you with absolutely no increase in respiratory rate or no coughing, but still the patient might be very sick because this patient might be suffering from sepsis. So how do you identify a patient of sepsis? A patient of sepsis is identified by presence of certain red flag signs which lead to acute life-threatening organ dysfunction in response to dysregulated host response. So what are these red flag signs? Altered mental status, difficulty or fast breathing, low oxygen saturation, reduced urine output, fast heart rate, weak pulse, cold extremities, low blood pressure, skin mottling, laboratory evidence of coagulopathy in form of increased INR, thrombocytopenia, metabolic acidosis on arterial blood gas analysis, high lactate levels of hyperbilirubinemia. Presence of any of these signs, one or more than one signs constitutes the definition of sepsis. The scoring system that we use for defining sepsis is SOFA score. So what you have to do is, if a patient comes to you at the onset, you have to assess, you have to see whether in the patient is showing any of these signs. And if any of these signs are present, then the patient is definitely suffering from a severe disease. So we categorized COVID-19 into mild, moderate, and severe. I would like to stress on 2 points. First is the disease may progress. Third, that all these signs and categories that we have discussed can overlap. So the first thing that you are going to look for are these red flag signs. Once you have seen that the patient has any of these red flag signs, the patient will be classified as severe. If no red flag signs are present, then your only option is that the patient may be a mild case of mild disease or moderate disease. So it is best to start in a reverse manner. If you are examining a patient, first thing you should do is look for a red flag signs. If no red flag signs are present, we are sure that this is not a severe disease. And then we go on to seeing saturation and respiratory rate. And based on saturation and respiratory rate, we will categorize the patient as moderate or severe. So you have seen the patient, you have set the team goals, you have categorized the patient, you have talked to the patient, you have talked to the patient attendants. Now comes the time for planning our investigation and management. Remember, treatment of COVID-19 is based on the clinical profile of the patient rather than the laboratory profile. So do not be in a haste to send investigation, and especially repeat investigation. Your stress should be on management of the patient, on maintenance of saturation in these patients. We don't need to send a repeated laboratory investigation. And that is why when it comes to investigation in these patients, we have a very clear-cut protocol. There are investigations that you need to do at the baseline when you have admitted the patient. Then there are certain investigations that need to be repeated daily. And then there are certain investigation which need to be done only if the need arises. So what are the baseline investigation that should be done at the onset and should be repeated daily? They are our normal routine investigation like CBC, blood sugar levels, serum electrolytes, LFT, AFT, and chest X-ray. These investigations are mandatory, and these investigations can guide us in treating a COVID-19 patient. Remember the fancy investigation that even common people have heard today, like D-dimer or LDH. Although they help in they provide great inputs, they help us a lot in management of the patient, but those are not mandatory. Our concentration should be on stabilization and management of patient rather than obtaining investigations. These baseline investigations are more than sufficient at the time of admission. So apart from these baseline investigation, we can send D-dimer, we can send LDH, procalcitonin. To determine the immunocompromised status, we need to send a HIV, HBs, AG, and HCG. Along with it, we would need to see the cardiac status of the patient, for which we need an ECG. We need a serum cardiac enzyme levels like TROPI or BNP. These are the investigations that you can send at baseline if it is available, but these are not the investigations that need to be repeated daily. Remember, you need to repeat D-dimer only when the situation of the patient deteriorates. We need to send LDH procalcitonin only when the patient's condition deteriorates. We do not need to monitor these inflammatory markers on a daily basis, and they are not mandatory for management of the patient. The management of the patient is not based on these investigations. And then there are certain investigations that can be done if there is a clinical indication. The first investigation in this line is HRCT. And the take home message from this is that the HRCT is done indiscriminately. Every patient of COVID-19, even in the first week of illness, gets an HRCT report. Patients come to us with an HRCT report, but again, HRCT is not mandatory. We will do an HRCT when we have stabilized the patient, or when we feel that now is the time if to change the treatment of the patient, or to change the management of the patient, or to change the oxygen therapy of the patient. HRCT is absolutely not needed. We can make a very good assessment about lung damage by looking at the X-ray also. We need an HRCT just to confirm those X-ray findings, and for assessing pulmonary complication and extent of lung damage. So this is the investigation lineup that you would follow. You will do baseline investigations and then repeat certain investigation only if the clinical profile of the patient deteriorates, and you will do advanced radiological investigation only to find out about pulmonary complication and the extent of lung damage. And why do we do this? Because the inflammatory markers like D-dimer, CRP, LDH, troponin, ferritin, and CPK, they do not guide in treatment of the patient. They suggest the prognosis or outcome in a patient. If the markers are raised, for example, if the D-dimer is raised above 1000, CRP is raised above 100, it says that the patient can have a poor prognosis, but these cannot be used for guiding the treatment of the patient. Management guideline for COVID-19 patient is still based on the clinical status of the patient. And there are certain issues that will come up if hopefully we won't have a repeat of COVID pandemic, but if the need arises, there are certain things that you should always think about. If COVID overlaps with influenza season, for example, you should think about giving empiric treatment for influenza or vaccination for influenza, and empirical therapy for bacterial pneumonia should be done in selected patients. And who are those selected patients? Patients who have pre-existing lung diseases like bronchial asthma, COPD, bronchiectasis, post-tubercular sequelae, elderly patients. Those groups of patients who are more vulnerable to bacterial pneumonia should always be treated with empirical therapy. So again, we don't need to give antibiotic to each and every patient. We do not need to do every investigation in each and every patient. The need for investigation and the need for treatment is based upon the clinical condition of the patient. So this was all about this was all about your initial approach to a patient of COVID-19. What should you do when you come in contact with COVID-19 patient for the first time? The take-home message, the key home messages that you should always carry, that you should be listening to is: listen to the patient, do not trivialize their complaint, follow the guidelines, follow the safety measures, and always prescribe treatment and evaluation and investigations based on standard guidelines, and keep yourself updated. Thank you very much for your attention.